The bar pulsed with laughter and clinking glasses. But my world tilted with the weight of one reckless sentence. "I think I'm in love with you." I slurred, the words slipping out like a runaway train before I could stop them. My boss, Ethan Caldwell, stared at me, his icy blue eyes narrowing as if I'd just set fire to his perfectly ordered life. It was supposed to be a simple work outing. The team from Caldwell and Associates, a sleek Manhattan law firm, had gathered at the Skylark, a rooftop bar with a view of the city that could make you feel like you owned it. I, Jamie Torres, a 28-year-old paralegal with a knack for overthinking, had no business drinking 4 whiskeys. But there I was, leaning too close to Ethan, the firm's untouchable managing partner, my heart pounding louder than the jazz band in the corner. Ethan was everything I wasn't: polished, disciplined, and infuriatingly distant. At 35, he commanded every room with a quiet intensity that made people want to please him. To crack the code of his stoic exterior, I'd spent a year at the firm, watching him from the edges, cataloging the way his jaw tensed during late-night case reviews or how his rare smiles felt like a reward. I was just another employee to him, a reliable cog in his machine, until I opened my stupid mouth. The night started innocently enough. Our team had just won a high-profile case, a corporate merger that had kept us buried in paperwork for months. Ethan, in a rare moment of generosity, suggested drinks to celebrate. I should have known better than to let the whiskey loosen my tongue, but the victory high and the city lights made me reckless. By the time I was 3 drinks in, my filter was gone, and Ethan was sitting beside me, his tie loosened just enough to make my chest ache. "You're drunk, Jamie," he said after my confession, his voice low and clipped, like he was scolding a child. He stood, brushing invisible lint from his suit, and gestured for me to follow. "Let's get you home." I stumbled after him, the weight of my words sinking in. The elevator ride down was silent, the air thick with my embarrassment. He drove me home in his sleek black Audi, the kind of car that screamed control, and I mumbled apologies the whole way. I didn't mean it. I lied, my face burning. He didn't respond, just stared at the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a sinking feeling that I'd ruined everything. My tiny Brooklyn apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in as I replayed the night. Ethan wasn't just my boss. He was the man I'd been quietly pining for since my first day at the firm. I'd seen the way he worked tireless, brilliant, and guarded, and I'd let myself imagine there was something human beneath the cold exterior. Now, I'd made a fool of myself. And worse, I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Monday morning loomed like a guillotine. I dragged myself to the office, my tie crooked and my stomach churning. The firm's glass-walled conference room felt like a fishbowl, every glance from a colleague a judgment. Ethan was already there, reviewing files with his usual precision. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge me at all. It was as if the night never happened. And somehow, that hurt worse than any reprimand. "Torres, my office," he said at noon, his voice cutting through the hum of the office. My heart sank. This was the moment he'd fire me. Or worse, transfer me to some dead-end department. I followed him, my palms sweating, and closed the door behind me. His office was a study in control, dark wood, minimalist decor, and a view of the Hudson that could make you forget the chaos of the world below. Ethan leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "About Friday night," he started, and I braced myself. "You were out of line." "I know," I said quickly, my voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. It was the alcohol. It won't happen again." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "You meant it, Didn't you? He asked, and there was something in his tone curiosity. Maybe. Or something softer it made my breath catch. I wanted to lie. To laugh it off. But my mouth betrayed me again. Yeah. I admitted. Barely above a whisper. I did. For the first time. Ethan looked unsettled. His fingers twitching against the edge of his desk. This complicates things, he said, more to himself than to me. You're a good paralegal. Jamie. I don't want to lose you. But this. He trailed off, shaking his head. I left his office feeling like I'd dodged a bullet but stepped into a minefield. The rest of the day, I buried myself in work, avoiding his gaze during meetings. But I couldn't shake the memory of his expression, not anger, not disgust, but something I couldn't name. It was enough to keep me awake that night, staring at my ceiling, wondering if I'd just thrown away my career for a fleeting moment of honesty. The days that followed were a tightrope walk. I threw myself into my work, hoping to prove I was more than a drunken mistake. But every interaction with Ethan felt charged, like static electricity waiting to spark. He was professional, as always, but there were moments of lingering glance, a pause before he spoke that made me question if I'd imagined the whole thing. The firm was gearing up for a new case, a pro bono project defending a local nonprofit against a predatory developer. Ethan assigned me to the team, a small group led by him directly. It was a chance to shine, but also a chance to crash and burn under his scrutiny. We worked late, the office emptying out until it was just the two of us, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and the hum of the air conditioning. You're good at this, Ethan said one night, breaking the silence as we reviewed depositions. His voice was softer than usual, almost warm. I looked up, startled, and found him watching me, his pen tapping lightly against the table. Thanks, I managed, my throat tight. I want to do right by the client. He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. You care too much, Jamie. It's a strength, but it'll burn you out if you're not careful. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to me, and it hit like a punch. I wanted to ask what he meant, to push past the wall he kept between us. But the moment passed, and he was back to business, pointing out a flaw in the case strategy. Outside of work, my life felt like a holding pattern. My best friend, Mia, a bartender with a knack for cutting through my nonsense, dragged me out for coffee to dissect the situation. You told your hot, unattainable boss you love him, and he didn't fire you, she said, grinning over her latte. That's not nothing, Jamie. He probably just feels sorry for me, I muttered, stirring my coffee until it was a whirlpool. Or maybe he's not as cold as you think, she countered. Give it time. People like him don't open up easy. Her words stuck with me, but doubt was a heavy weight. Ethan was a fortress, and I was just a guy with a crush and a bad habit of speaking without thinking. Still, I couldn't help but notice the small shifts in him, the way he'd ask my opinion on case details, or how he'd linger in the break room when I was there, pretending to read emails on his phone. One evening, as we wrapped up another late night, Ethan offered to drive me home again. I hesitated, remembering the awkward ride after the bar. But my train was down for maintenance, and I was too tired to argue. The car was quiet, the city lights blurring past us. I stole glances at him, his profile sharp against the glow of the dashboard. Why didn't you fire me? I blurted out, unable to stop myself. After what I said. He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the road. Finally, he said, because you're good at your job, and because I don't think you're the kind of person who says things he doesn't mean. My heart pounded, but before I could respond, he pulled up to my apartment. Get some rest, he said, his tone final. I nodded, stepping out into the cool night air, my mind racing with questions I didn't dare ask. Back at the office, the pro bono case was heating up. The nonprofit, a community center for at-risk youth, was fighting to keep its building, a haven for kids in a neighborhood being swallowed by gentrification. Ethan was relentless, tearing apart the developers' arguments with surgical precision. I admired him, but I also saw the toll it took: late nights, skipped meals, the weight of responsibility in his tense shoulders. During a strategy session, I suggested reaching out to a local activist group for public support. Ethan raised an eyebrow, considering it. Not a bad idea, he said, and the faint approval in his voice felt like a victory. For the first time, I felt like I was more than just the guy who'd embarrassed himself at the bar. I was part of his team, maybe even someone he trusted. But trust was a fragile thing, and I was still walking a tightrope. Every time our hands brushed passing a file, or our eyes met across the conference table, I felt the pull of something unspoken. I didn't know if it was hope or delusion, but it was enough to keep me holding on, waiting for a crack in Ethan's armor. The pro bono case became our world, a pressure cooker of deadlines and emotions. The community center's director, a fierce woman named Carla, invited us to visit, and Ethan insisted I come along. Stepping into the center was like entering another universe. Kids laughing, painting murals, playing basketball in a cramped gym. It was alive, chaotic, and vital. Everything Ethan's polished office wasn't. Carla showed us around, her pride evident despite the peeling paint and outdated equipment. "This place is their safe haven," she said, gesturing to a group of teens working on a mural of a phoenix. "If we lose it, these kids lose everything." I glanced at Ethan, expecting his usual detached professionalism, but his face softened, his eyes lingering on a kid sketching in the corner. On the drive back, he was quiet, his hands tight on the wheel. "You were right about the activist group," he said suddenly. "We need to rally public support. Set up a meeting with them." I nodded, surprised by the acknowledgement. "I'll get it done. Those kids, they deserve a chance." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "You sound like you know what it's like." I hesitated, then decided to take the risk. "I do. I grew up in a neighborhood like that. No fancy community center. But I had a mentor who kept me out of trouble, kept me from feeling invisible." Ethan didn't respond right away, but his silence felt different, like he was actually listening. For the first time, I felt seen, not as the paralegal who'd made a fool of himself, but as someone with a story worth hearing. Back at the office, the activist group meeting was a success. They brought energy and ideas, planning a rally to draw media attention. Ethan let me take the lead, and I thrived under the responsibility, coordinating with the group and drafting press releases. But the late nights were wearing me down, and Ethan noticed. "You're pushing too hard," he said one evening, catching me in the break room with my third coffee of the night. "You'll burn out." "I'm fine," I lied, but my hands shook as I poured sugar into my cup. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sharp and clean. "You're not fine. Go home." "Jamie, that's an order." I laughed, a nervous sound. "Since when do you care about my sleep schedule?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd snap at me. Instead, he said, "I care about my team. You're no good to me exhausted." It wasn't exactly a love letter, but it was enough to keep me awake that night, replaying his words. Was I reading too much into it? Mia's voice echoed in my head. "He's not as cold as you think." But Ethan was still my boss, still the man who kept everyone at arm's length. I couldn't afford to hope for more. The rally was a turning point. Hundreds showed up, chanting and holding signs outside the community center. Carla spoke, her voice raw with passion, and I felt a surge of pride watching the kids join in, their faces lit with defiance. Ethan stood beside me, his suit out of place among the crowd, but he clapped along, a rare smile breaking through. Afterward, we ended up at a diner nearby, just the two of us, grabbing a quick bite before heading back to the office. The fluorescent lights and greasy fries felt like a different world from his usual polished existence. "You did good today," he said, dipping a fry in ketchup with a precision that was so very Ethan. "Thanks," I said, my heart doing that stupid flutter again. "You're not so bad at this community stuff yourself." He snorted, a sound so human it caught me off guard. "Don't get used to it." For a moment, we were just two guys in a diner. Not boss and employee. Not unattainable and hopeless. But then his phone buzzed, and he was back to business, checking emails with that familiar wall sliding into place. As we left, I caught him watching me again, his eyes lingering a second too long. "What?" I asked, half laughing, half nervous. "Nothing," he said, but the corner of his mouth twitched, like he was fighting a smile. It was small, but it was enough to make me believe there was something there, something worth fighting for. The case was building momentum, but so was the tension between Ethan and me. Every shared glance, every accidental brush of hands, felt like a spark in a room full of gasoline. I tried to focus on the work depositions, research, rallying community support, but my mind kept drifting to him, to the way he'd softened at the community center, to the almost smile in the diner. One night, as we worked late, Ethan caught me staring at a photo of the community center's kids pinned to the office bulletin board. "You're invested in this," he said, not a question, but a statement. "Yeah," I admitted. "It's personal. I see myself in those kids. I know what it's like to need a place to belong." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his tie loosened just enough to make my pulse race. "I didn't have that," he said, his voice low. "Growing up, it was just me and my mom. No community, no safety net, just survival." It was the most he'd ever shared, and it hit me hard. Ethan, the untouchable boss, had been a kid once, fighting his own battles. I wanted to ask more, to peel back another layer. But he straightened. "The moment gone. Get the latest brief to me by morning," he said, retreating to his office. The next day, disaster struck. The developer's legal team filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the community center's lease was invalid. It was a gut punch, threatening to unravel everything we'd built. Ethan called an emergency meeting, his voice sharp as he delegated tasks. "Jamie, you're on public records. Dig up anything that can prove the lease's legitimacy." I threw myself into it, spending hours at the city clerk's office, combing through dusty files. Late that night, I found a notarized document from 1998, buried in a mislabeled box, confirming the center's lease was airtight. I texted Ethan a photo of the document, my hands shaking with excitement. His reply came instantly. "Good work. Bring it to my place. We need to strategize." His address followed. A sleek condo in Tribeca. My stomach flipped. Going to Ethan's home felt like crossing another line. But I couldn't say no. His apartment was exactly what I'd imagined, minimalist, immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that made my Brooklyn shoebox feel like a closet. Ethan was in a sweater and jeans, a version of him I'd never seen, and it threw me off balance. "You found the golden ticket," he said, holding up the document, a rare grin breaking through. We spent hours mapping out our next steps, the tension of the case mixing with the tension between us. At one point, Our hands brushed over a stack of papers, and neither of us pulled away. My heart pounded, and I saw it in his eyes to a flicker of something that wasn't just professional. "Jamie," he said, his voice rough, "about what you said that night." I froze, my breath catching. "You don't have to say anything," I interrupted, terrified of what came next. "It was a mistake." "Was it?" he asked, and the question hung between us, heavy and electric. Before I could answer, his phone rang, shattering the moment. It was Carla, updating us on the rally's media coverage. Ethan slipped back into work mode, but the air felt different, like we'd stepped closer to something dangerous. The next day, we presented the lease document in court, and the judge denied the developer's motion. It was a victory, but a small one. The war wasn't over. Back at the office, Ethan called me into his office again. "You're proving yourself," he said, his tone careful. "Don't let it go to your head." I grinned, unable to help myself. "Wouldn't dream of it, boss." He rolled his eyes, but there was warmth there, a crack in the ice I'd never seen before. As I left his office, I felt a dangerous hope growing, one I wasn't sure I could contain. The victory in court gave us breathing room, but the developer wasn't backing down. They escalated, digging into the community center's financial records, claiming mismanagement to discredit Carla. The stakes were higher now, and so was the pressure. Ethan was relentless, working late every night, and I matched his pace, determined to prove I could handle it. But it wasn't just the case pushing me to my limits, it was Ethan. Every moment we spent together felt like a test, a push and pull between professionalism and something unspoken. I caught myself watching him too often, memorizing the way his brow furrowed when he read, the way his voice softened when he spoke to Carla about the kids. I was falling harder, and it was terrifying. One night, after a brutal day of countering the developer's latest attack, Ethan suggested we grab a drink to decompress. Not at the Skylark, thank God, but a quiet dive bar near the office. It was the kind of place where the jukebox played Springsteen and the bartender didn't care who you were. We sat in a corner booth, nursing beers, the case momentarily forgotten. "You're different," Ethan said out of nowhere, his eyes on his bottle, "from the others at the firm. You care about the why, not just the win." I shrugged, trying to play it cool despite the heat creeping up my neck. "I just want to do something that matters." He looked at me then, really looked, and I felt exposed, like he could see every hope and fear I'd tried to hide. "That's rare," he said softly. "Most people just want the paycheck." "What about you?" I asked, emboldened by the beer. "Why do you do this?" He leaned back, his guard up, but not fully. "I didn't have a choice growing up. Law was my way out. Now, it's who I am." It was another glimpse into the man behind the suit, and it made my chest ache. I wanted to tell him he was more than his job, more than the cold exterior he wore like armor. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "You're good at it. But you're more than just a lawyer, Ethan." He didn't respond, but his eyes held mine, and for a moment, the bar faded away. Then he looked down, breaking the spell. "We should get back to work," he said, but his voice lacked its usual edge. The next week was a blur of strategy sessions and media interviews. The rally had put the community center in the spotlight, and public support was growing. But the developers team was ruthless, leaking stories to the press about Carla's past financial struggles. I saw the toll it took on her, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching. Ethan and I worked side by side, countering every move. One night, as we finalized a press release, he leaned over my shoulder to point out a typo, his breath warm against my ear. I froze, my heart racing. And when he pulled back, his hand lingered on my chair. "Sorry," he muttered, but he didn't move away immediately. The air crackled, and I knew he felt it too, the pull that had been building since that drunken night. "Ethan," I started, my voice barely steady, but he cut me off. "We can't," he said, his tone final but laced with regret. "Not now. Not with the case." I nodded, swallowing the hurt. He was right, but it didn't make it easier. We went back to work, the unspoken hanging between us like a storm cloud. The case took a turn when Carla found an old donor list. Wealthy patrons who'd supported the center years ago. Ethan tasked me with tracking them down, hoping their influence could sway public opinion. It was grueling work, but it kept me distracted from the ache in my chest. Every call, every meeting, felt like a step towards saving the center and maybe, just maybe, toward understanding Ethan. The donor outreach paid off. One of the old patrons, a retired judge named Margaret Voss, agreed to publicly endorse the community center. Her name carried weight, and her support shifted the narrative in our favor. The press started covering the center's impact, not just the developer's smear campaign. For the first time, it felt like we might actually win. But the closer we got to victory, the more I felt Ethan pulling away. He was still professional, still brilliant, but there was a new distance in his eyes, like he was rebuilding the walls I'd started to chip away. It hurt more than I expected, a quiet ache that followed me home each night. One evening, as we prepared for a crucial hearing, I couldn't take it anymore. We were alone in the conference room, papers scattered across the table. Did I do something wrong? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Ethan looked up, startled. "What?" "You've been different," I said, struggling to keep my tone even. "Since the bar. Since your apartment. If it's about what I said, just tell me." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's not you, Jamie. It's me. I can't afford to lose focus right now." "Focus?" I laughed, bitter. "You think I'm not focused? I'm killing myself for this case. For you." "I know," he interrupted, his voice low but intense. "And that's the problem. You're making me question things I've spent years keeping locked down." My breath caught. "What things?" He stood, pacing to the window, his back to me. "Feelings. Attachments. I don't do those, Jamie. Not with anyone." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Maybe you could. Maybe you're just scared." He turned, his eyes blazing. "You think I'm scared? I'm trying to protect you. This job. This Casey, it's all I have. If I let this," he gestured between us, "happen, and it goes wrong, I lose everything." It was the most honest he'd ever been, and it broke something in me. "You think I'd let it go wrong?" I asked, my voice soft. "I'm not asking for everything, Ethan. I'm just asking for a chance." For a moment, he looked like he might say yes, like he might let the walls fall. But then his phone buzzed, and the moment was gone. "We have a hearing tomorrow," he said, his voice flat. "Get some rest." I left the office feeling raw, like I'd laid my heart bare and gotten nothing in return. But I couldn't give up, not on the case, and not on him. The hearing was a battle. The developers team came prepared, throwing every legal trick at us. But Ethan was a force of nature, dismantling their arguments with precision. I watched him, proud and heartbroken, knowing he was fighting for the kids as much as I was. When the judge ruled in our favor, granting a temporary injunction to stop the developers' plans, the room erupted in cheers. Afterward, Carla hugged us both, tears in her eyes. "You're saving this place," she said. "You're giving those kids a future." Ethan smiled. A real one. And for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen for, not the cold boss, but someone who cared, who fought for what mattered. As we left the courthouse, he grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. "You were right," he said, his voice low. "I'm scared, but I don't want to lose this, whatever this is." My heart stopped. "Then don't," I said, meeting his gaze. "Take a chance, Ethan." He didn't answer, but his hand lingered on my arm, and that was enough for now. The injunction was a lifeline, but the fight wasn't over. The developer appealed, dragging the case into a new phase of legal maneuvering. Ethan and I worked harder than ever, but something had shifted between us. His walls were still there, but they were crumbling, and every small gesture, a hand on my shoulder, a shared look, felt like a step closer to something real. One night, after another marathon session, Ethan invited me to his place again, this time for coffee, not work. I hesitated, remembering the last time, but the hope in my chest won out. His apartment felt different without the urgency of the case. Warmer somehow. We sat on his couch, mugs in hand, the city sparkling outside. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, his voice careful, "about taking a chance." I set my mug down, my pulse racing. "And?" He looked at me, his blue eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "I don't know how to do this, Jamie. I've spent my life avoiding this." He gestured vaguely, but I knew what he meant. "You don't have to have it all figured out," I said. "Just be honest with me." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, like he was bracing himself. "I've never let anyone in. Not like this. But you make me want to try." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was enough. I reached out, my hand brushing his, and he didn't pull away. We sat there, the silence heavy with possibility, until he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. It was tentative, like he was testing the waters, but it set my world on fire. The kiss deepened, and for the first time, I felt him let go, his guard down, his hands pulling me closer. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven. "This is a bad idea," he whispered, but he was smiling. "Then let's be bad together," I said, and he laughed, a sound that felt like a gift. The next day, we were back to work, but everything was different. Stolen glances, secret smiles. It was like we were building something fragile but beautiful. The case was still a beast, but we were a team, stronger together. Carla noticed, pulling me aside one day. "You two are good for each other," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Don't let him push you away." I didn't plan to, but the developer's next move hit hard. They offered a settlement, a hefty sum to relocate the community center. Carla was tempted, the money enough to rebuild somewhere else. But Ethan was adamant. "This isn't just about a building," he told her. "It's about what it means to those kids." I saw a new side of him then, a passion that went beyond winning. He was fighting for something bigger, and I loved him for it. But love was a dangerous word, one I hadn't dared say again since that drunken night. I wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. As the appeal loomed, Ethan and I grew closer, our late nights now laced with quiet moments, his hand on mine, a kiss stolen in the elevator. But doubt lingered. He was still my boss, still the man who'd built his life on control. I wondered if he could really let himself love me, or if I was just a moment he'd eventually walk away from. The appeal was our final stand. The courtroom was packed, community members, activists, even some of the kids from the center, their faces hopeful but scared. Ethan was a force, his arguments sharp and passionate, weaving together the lease, the donor support, and the center's impact. I sat behind him, my heart in my throat, watching the man I loved fight for something bigger than himself. The judge ruled in our favor. A permanent injunction protecting the community center. The room erupted. Carla crying as she hugged us. The kids cheering. Ethan turned to me, his eyes bright with victory. And for a moment, it was just us. The world fading away. That night, we celebrated at the community center. A makeshift party with pizza and music. The kids painted a new mural. A vibrant thank you to Ethan and the team. He stood with them, laughing as they smeared paint on his hands. And I saw the man he could beepen. Alive. Free. Later, we slipped away to the rooftop. The city sprawling below us. You did this, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You gave them a future. We did this, he corrected, his hand finding mine. Jamie, I've been running from Thysis for so long. But I'm done running. He kissed me then, under the stars, and it felt like a promise. I love you, I said, the words spilling out. No longer a drunken mistake, but a truth I couldn't hold back. I love you too, he said, and the words were a weight lifted. A wall shattered. It wasn't perfect, there were still challenges. Still the reality of him being my boss, but it was real. And it was ours. Months later, the community center thrived. A beacon for the kids who needed it. Ethan and I navigated our relationship carefully, balancing work and love. But every step felt like a victory. That drunken night had been a spark. A reckless moment that led to something beautiful. And as we stood together, watching the kids paint their futures on those walls, I knew we'd found something worth fighting for, a love that could break even the coldest walls.